Grief, a set of emotions that brings humans together through one thing: loss. Cultures worldwide express grief in many different ways: funerals, ceremonies, rituals. But grief doesn't just deal with death, it pertains to the tragic loss of anything, really. You can grieve for a past family member, or even for the loss of your childhood home. Expressions of grief can be more powerful than the feelings in which they're derived from, which is why art is so interconnected with the grieving process. Music is arguably the most effective at conveying these feelings because it elicits, nay, it demands that you be put in the shoes of the composer. This is how we get such works such as Franz Schubert's Winterreise. Franz Peter Schubert was born on January 31st, 1797, in Vienna, Austria, the second youngest born to Franz Theodor, a schoolteacher, and Elizabeth Fietz, a housewife. The couple would have 14 children, 9 of which would die in infancy, leaving only 5 Schubert children: Ignaz, Ferdinand, Karl, Franz Peter, and Maria Theresa. Schubert was one of the 4 true-born Viennese classical composers, alongside Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. The Schubert home was a musical one, with Franz playing viola in the family string quartet. At the age of 7, he was to audition for the imperial court composer of Austria-Hungary, Antonio Salieri, who was apparently so impressed by the boy, he put him as a mezzo-soprano in the imperial Hofkapelle. At age 8, he received instruction in counterpoint, figured bass, singing, and organ from the parish church's organist, Michael Holze. Schubert would then be admitted to the Hofkapelle as a full member, which included admittance to the top non-aristocratic boarding school in Vienna, the Kaiserliches Königliches Stadtkonvikt, or the Imperial and Royal City College. Here, he would receive world-class musical training, which would lead to some of his first compositions. During this time, however, he would continue to study privately with Antonio Salieri. During his time at the Stadtkonvikt, Schubert would continue to develop his own personal style in his music. But at the age of 15, his mother would pass away. Less than a year later, his father would remarry in 1813 after receiving warnings from the school about his academic performance. Schubert would leave the Stadtkonvikt in hopes to make his own solo music career. He would spend some time training and working as a teacher, much like his father, writing very little during this time. The summer of 1814, however, would prove to be Schubert's boom in creativity and composition. He was using poetry from writers he had grown up with, namely Mattheson and Goethe. By 18, he had already composed nearly 150 pieces, one of which would cement Schubert as a competent composer in Vienna, Gretchen am Spinnrade. This was a setting of 4 Goethe poems, which depicted in the music a spinning wheel and the representation of a woman's feelings. Schubert would also write Der Erlkönig using a Goethe poem, depicting a father and son's frantic ride whilst the elf king, or Erlkönig, tries to seduce the boy and kill him. Schubert would continue to use German poetry in his songs for much of his short life. Eventually, after reading a collection of poems written by Wilhelm Müller, Schubert would find himself entranced, even haunted by the text, and would ultimately use it to write one of his most famous pieces, Winterreise. Winterreise was composed in 1827 and was among the last of Schubert's pieces before his untimely death on November 19, 1828, aged 31, from a venereal disease, most likely syphilis. The piece was originally composed in 2 parts, 12 songs each part contained within its own separate notebook. Notebook 1 carries the superscription February 1827. Notebook 2, October 1827. These dates refer to the work's completion, not initiation. The set of works is the second of Müller's poems that Schubert put to music, the first being Die schöne Müllerin. The work used Müller's collection of poems, Die Winterreise, which details the struggle of a man who sets out to wander the land after catching the woman he loved most cheating. The cycle contains themes of grief, longing, pain, and suffering throughout, which mark a crucial point in Schubert's career. Close to the end of his life, while struggling with both mental and physical illnesses from his infection, he would use the song cycle to portray the darkness he was experiencing. Out of the 24 pieces, 6 convey the evolution of grief the best. Numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, 17, and 24. Entitled Die Wetterfahne, Gefrorene Tränen, Esterung, Der Lindenbaum, Im Dorfe, and Der Leiermann, respectively. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross created the 5 stages of grief model and published it in her 1969 book, On Death and Dying. She cataloged grief as being a series of emotions that flow from one to another. Stage 1 is denial, where the person denies the event happening in an attempt to reckon with the situation. Stage 2 is anger, wherein after failing to deny the occurrence, the person will often express anger over the situation in an attempt to gain control. Stage 3 is bargaining, where the individual will attempt to find meaning in the event, be it positive, negative, or otherwise. When meaning can't be found, however, that's when we get to stage 4, depression. This is arguably the hardest stage to overcome for most. The individual will often feel intense feelings of loneliness, guilt, sadness, as well as a loss of self-worth. This can be debilitating for some, and oftentimes requires emotional support. Finally, there's acceptance, where the individual has come to terms with the event and is capable of processing it in a healthy manner. Number 2, Die Wetterfahne, or the weather vane. This is the initial event where our main character, we'll call him the traveler, discovers that the woman he has been madly in love with is sleeping around with another man. Baffled, he exclaims, "I should have noticed sooner the emblem set upon the house. Then he would have never tried to look for faithful womanhood within. Indoors, the wind plays with hearts, as on the roof, but not so loudly. Why do they care for my sorrows?" Devastated, he embarks on a journey to reconcile with the breaking of his heart through the cold winter snow. The piece opens up with a frantic piano line, signifying the conflict that he feels within. He's a well-tempered man, so he remains polite while showing the displeasure that he's experiencing, though the intensity is still present within. Number 3, Gefrorene Tränen, or Drops of Ice, portrays the denial stage. Schubert writes in accented quarter notes throughout the entire piece to signify the traveler plodding through the harsh winter snow as he grumbles to himself about his crying, asking why his tears are freezing instead of melting the ice. Since they emerge hot from within, with so much pain and suffering in them, they shouldn't be freezing. Schubert will frequently use descending melodies on the word fallen to paint the word in a musical light. Growing angrier at this, he picks up his pace as we begin number 4, Esterung, or solidification. This piece is aptly titled because now his anger is starting to solidify inside him, turning this well-tempered man into a being as cold as the ice around him. Triplet rhythms present throughout the entire piece present a frantic, unreasonable tone to the audience. We're put into his shoes as he wishes for both his life and surroundings to not be so bleak. He wishes to melt the snow with these frozen tears and see the ground beneath. Look for some keepsake of his lost love so he won't feel so alone. Broken, he exclaims, "My heart is as good as frozen. Within it her image gazes coldly. If ever my heart thaws again, her image too will melt away." Reaching the outer gates of the town, the traveler stumbles upon a lime tree, or Der Lindenbaum. Here he sees all the loving words he's carved into it, remembering all the times he had come to it, be it good or bad, in search of solace. Number 5, shows how the traveler is attempting to bargain with everything that has happened to him. And its branches rustled as if they called to me, "Come here to me, lad, here you will find your rest." But he knows he won't find rest here. So keeping on, hearing the winds carry the voice of this tree, telling him, "There you would have found rest." He desperately wishes that he could have, but the thing that brought him comfort and solace no longer does. Schubert uses major tonalities to portray the happiness of these memories, and uses its parallel minor to sour that memory. Sour it like milk, as we see him walk past in the dead of night. Eventually, we reach number 17, Im Dorfe, or in the village. This is arguably where the traveler is most depressed. He travels through a village in the middle of the night, hearing dogs bark and snarl at him. He laments over the loss of his hope and dreaming, and says that, "I am done with all this dreaming. Why linger among those asleep?" The hour of dreams surrounds him, but this scorned, broken man will never know rest again. The stormy prelude, with its powerful octaves, and the open octaves in unison with the voice in the first stanza, measure 1 through 8, not only depicts the outward storm and its bleakness, but more importantly, the storm within the heart and soul of this forsaken man. The 16th note passages present in the whole piece also portray the dogs baring their teeth and snarling at him as he passes on. Schubert also uses a major key to contrast the rest of the piece when he talks about the happy dreams that the villagers experience. After wandering some more, our traveler finally reaches the end of his journey. Number 24, Der Leiermann, or the hurdy-gurdy man. After coming to terms with the breaking of his heart, we find our main character walking through a village when he notices an old man playing the hurdy-gurdy. The man stands barefoot on the ice, and with cold, frozen fingers, he cranks the instrument. After hearing the music, something clicks inside of him, and he begs the old man to let him sing his songs while he plays. The traveler has found a new purpose, a new reason to live. Schubert uses the left hand in the piano to represent the drone of the hurdy-gurdy. For the entire piece, the same melody and harmony are used, showing that the old man plays only one song and plays it forever. He knows his purpose, and due to that, so does now our traveler. Winterreise is an incredible work, and it is one that is filled rife with themes of grief, pain, suffering, longing, and the ideas of grief really hadn't been explored scientifically then. And despite this, Schubert uses the power of music to help portray the ebb and flow of how humans process grief, despite the five-stage method not being developed for another 142 years. So many different performers and composers have been deeply moved by this music, including myself. And the performer really has to be haunted by something in order to effectively present and perform this music. This music is an exceptional example of the mindset that we begin to see at the end of the 18th century, where composers started to care less about producing polished products and more about evoking feelings and really writing music in a way that was emotionally charged as well. Schubert was a trendsetter in every sense of the word, and his contributions to music and the evolution of music have changed the way we write music forever.